it's a beautiful avenue, right? I mean, if you can close your eyes to everything else and just take a walk down Monument Avenue and back again, especially in the springtime when the sun is coming up, dogwoods are in bloom, it's gorgeous. It's a beautiful, beautiful street. All you have to do is shut your eyes to every other reality. I'm Jim Somerville. I'm pastor here at Richmond's First Baptist Church. Been here since 2008, a little more than 17 years. I was pastor at First Baptist Church in Washington, D.C., and got a call from the search committee here in Richmond. And they said, we'd like to talk to you. Could you send us a resume? And I checked out the church and then wrote back. I said, I'm sorry, I don't think that's going to be a good fit. I feel like you're probably too conservative theologically and too traditional in terms of your worship style. So thanks very much, but no thanks. So 5 months later, they called me back and said, what about now? So I said, well, at least I'll come and have a talk with your committee. I remember asking the search committee, how much Civil War history would I have to know to be your pastor? And they agreed. Some, at least some. So I think they were aware of that. I don't think it defined the church. The statue of Stonewall Jackson didn't define the church, even though it was right on the corner. But I would soon find out how deep those sentiments ran in some people.
Moment, we can now project the winner of the presidential race. CNN projects.
Pennsylvania goes to Donald Trump. Donald, thank you very much.
I remember that moment on that Wednesday morning. I didn't stay up to see how things had turned out, but I checked my phone on Wednesday morning and it said that Donald Trump had won, and I was just shocked to the core because I felt like all of the things that he stood for were counter to the kinds of things that Jesus stood for. And yet America had said, we're going to go with this guy. I don't think of myself as a liberal or a progressive preacher, but I really do try to preach Jesus as much as possible. And he has some views that are considered really liberal or progressive. What I found for me personally is that people began to hear my sermons through the ears of politics, and they began to decide, oh, you are more liberal than we thought you were, or you must not have voted for Donald Trump. So I soon learned that when people accused me of being political, that means your politics are not my politics. 2020 was the perfect storm, right? I mean, it was an election year and this deeply divided electorate. There was the murder of George Floyd and the global pandemic. I mean, really kind of at the front edge of that thing, trying to figure out what COVID-19 meant and what it might do to us. So what I was hearing here on the avenue is that, night after night, people were gathering to protest racial injustice, and that the city was reacting to this as if there was looting, burning, rioting going on somewhere downtown, and the police were responding to this very aggressively. And I just kept thinking, it's probably not as bad as everybody thinks it is, that we do have the right to assemble, and we have the right to protest. And again, what I saw was young people coming down the street to some of those protests
who didn't look like troublemakers. They looked like peacemakers. And they're coming to say, we can do better than this as a city, as a nation.
Right here on Monument Avenue, we've got people protesting and carrying signs, and our response was to give out bottles of water because people get thirsty, all kinds of people. But that got some criticism from the congregation. And then, of course, there was July 1st. July 1st was a Wednesday. We were recording a worship service here in the sanctuary at 3 o'clock. When I walked down the street from my house, I saw a crowd gathering and a crane parked near the Stonewall Jackson monument. And yeah, they had looped the webbing around the statue and they were getting ready to lift it off the base. And then it began to rain. I mean, it was pouring rain, but nobody left. They wanted to see this thing happen. And sure enough, Stonewall Jackson begins to come up off the pedestal, and a staff member came to me and said, "Can we ring the bell?" And so we began ringing the bell, and Channel 8 was there recording everything on television cameras. And that night, that's what showed on TV. Pouring rain, here goes the statue of Stonewall Jackson, here's the church bell at First Baptist, just ringing. And my phone began to ring, like nonstop. People in my church who were calling and saying, why did we ring the bell? People said, if that's the kind of church this is, I'm going to have to find another church.
So let me tell you about this bell.
Yeah, tell me about
Right here. This bell was offered to the Confederacy and given to be melted down to make like cannonballs or cannons. But the Thomas family bought it back. It was this bell that we rang on July the 1st, 2020, when the statue of Stonewall Jackson was coming off its pedestal. So for that woman who asked the favor, must have been really sweet to be standing out here in the rain, hearing the bell ring, and watching that symbol of oppression come off the pedestal. When somebody tells me, like, it's not about hate, it's about heritage, I often say the Civil War was about preserving a way of life and an economy that depended on slavery. So you can say it wasn't about slavery, but it was. It was about preserving a way of life that depended on the institution of slavery. To be molded into canon, if so needed. To save the bell through arrangement made with the Confederate Secretary of War, Mr. Thomas gave for it a stated sum in gold coin. And through the years it has rung as it rings today, peace on earth, goodwill to men.
So to walk down Monument Avenue in the old days was to see that identity writ large. This is the most important thing about Richmond, is its role as the former capital of the Confederacy. And we have erected these statues to these Civil War generals so that Richmond will never forget what it was and the important role that it played in that struggle. That feels different to me now, especially since the monuments have come down. So I love the way Richmond is becoming a modern city with modern concerns. For a long time, it felt like the number one export from Richmond was Civil War history. And maybe there's some sense in which that is still true. But I see so many other things happening now and new things happening. The relationship with the Avenue is different than it used to be. And I think that's because the monuments have come down. Whoever decided that that would be a good idea for the city and for its future, I think they were right about that in terms of separating Richmond from that Civil War history in some sense. You know, in some ways, to erase those monuments from the avenue, it's like wiping the slate clean and saying, what do we want to become now? What could we become if we weren't so tied to that Civil War past?